Hi, Malena.
Hi, Bryan.
It's hard to come out of those films in a way, in a good way. It's like they're very mesmerizing, and you are they really take you somewhere. So we just watched both those films. They're both incredible. I guess I just wanted to start talking about the first one we saw to begin with, the Anagrams of Light. Can you tell us a little bit about the title and about sort of a little bit more about what that were, how that work came about?
Yes, I will do it gladly. Well, first of all, I want to also welcome everyone who is joining us tonight or today. I guess there is a multiplicity of day times here. And also thank the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles for this wonderful invitation of showcasing both of these films. Also Bryan Barcena, who is here tonight, and also Tracy Robinson and Ryan Dang and Rosenda Moore, who has been helping me and assisting me all throughout. And yes, about Anagrams of Light. It's a film that I made in 2011, a film on Super 8. It's one cartridge of film, meaning the 2 minutes and 40 seconds that the cartridge itself, the roll itself lasts, is what I used that evening. So it's a one night filming in a very spontaneous setup, nothing planned. It was in a place in Montreal, an evening in Montreal, of fireworks, that's obvious. And the film it kind of became later on, and it became later on by the departure of a friend from Montreal, Javiera. So the film is dedicated to her. I was that evening with her, and she's an artist, visual artist from Chile, who lived here in Montreal for many years. And she works with anagrams. That's her core. So to me, it was to evoke, in a way, the multiplicity and the playfulness of light, going beyond, the motive in this film, which is the fireworks, but more talking about the transformative experience as well of an evening, and the materiality of light, right, which has that powerful quality by itself, but also by the way we can perceive it, right? So in this case, I think the camera becomes a passage through, and the gestures make, in a way, light to become in its materiality and manifest in all the diverse forms by using as well the different techniques, right, that can be in a playful manner used in the camera. And the Super 8 camera allows you, in some ways, it has also lots of limitations, a very limited, simple camera. So it's interesting as well how, that technology in its own limitation can be used in so many expanded ways and
Right.
tricked, in a way. And they're like a tradition in a beautiful historical manner of many filmmakers just actually working only on Super 8, and developing an immense, infinite language through
Right.
this camera and through filming.
Right. I think it's really interesting in both films, this idea of the gestures with the camera, like that the camera becomes an extension of your movement, right? And there's movements that I assume are done inside the camera, right? Of course, like a focus, a zoom, and in and out, right? But there's also these sort of movements that are more obviously are happening in the realm of your body, right? Like moving up and down, or like zooming in, and like what is the process like when you're actually filming it? How how is your body in relation to the camera and filming? I know you're talking about how Super 8 allows you to do that.
Mm. Well, in this, for this film, actually, well, it's all edited in the camera. So it's, and this particular camera doesn't allow you to, well, I did not use the rewind function. It has some rewind function, but it did not use it. So it's from beginning to end, basically. It's the instant of capturing the speed of it as well, right? It's like it's an event that happens so quickly, right? And
Right.
I'm using frame by frame photography at night, which meant to me to fix the camera and work only in that static position with the possibilities that the zoom could give me. So there is a play of back and forth with the zoom in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So the position itself is static, and that's what is interesting as
Oh,
well. That when you fix camera, and I think in general I work with a fixed position and like, or it's very present throughout my work. But movement of space and time, it happens within the image. So it
mm-hmm.
has to do more with the different juxtapositions of imagery and the movement that can be executed by just framing in different ways, or the number of frames that
Mm-hmm.
I could be filming, right? And that creates a disruptive movement that we can
Right.
see in Anagrams of Light. And these different configurations as well, right? It's kind of like open up the possibilities of configurations that by not being able to have the immediacy of looking at the image that it's being produced, it's a much more sensorial experience, right? Of memory and traces that
Mm-hmm.
in a way I hold back in the process of filming, which it can become, very meditative or very well like focused throughout the process of capturing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting to hear because I there's so much movement in a way that you sort of assume the person that's filming it is being very dynamic, right? Because it is like, while it's static, it sounds like an oxymoron. It's very dynamic and static at the same time.
Mm.
There's a lot of sort of like jumpiness and cuts, but I'm wondering, thinking about the same way about what the experience of filming out, how Altiplano was filmed and how you went about sort of like scouting those locations or being in that landscape.
Well, that's an extensive answer.
Well, it's Altiplano's the star. The landscape is the star of that film, so let's give her due.
Well, I mean, I have a history with that landscape, right? Because I was born and raised and grew up in Chile. So that place in particularly has been very present throughout, growing up, basically. Within that as well, there was a hidden story that I was not able to experience, and the film started from that point, which was basically that my family from my father's side, from my mother's side, was born and raised in the northern Altiplano area, in the Puna.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a place I've never been visited before, so I haven't been there. And well, multiple things happen in between, like an explosion in the Geyser Studios in 2014 drew my attention, which happened because of geothermic research with the intention, obviously, of exploiting the place, which is a sacred place for particularly for the Atacameño people that lives there. And eventually meeting Una Mosna, who is director of Media City Film Festival, allowed me to travel there through a project that she created, which was Underground Mines. And together we travel to this area. The scouting never happened really because in a way I knew about the place, but the idea was also to discover it, right? In some way or another, to discover it in the sense of following a path that is being created moment to moment. Mm-hmm. So along with Daichi Saito and John Price, who were also part of this this project, Underground Mine, we traveled throughout 3 weeks in different locations, mostly located around the Salar de Atacama, and then crossing the Andes to Argentina, northwest Argentina. So that's a little bit how the project started. Later, I went to different occasions to film again, to different places. One a bit northern from where we filmed originally, and the other one in the south, I mean, it's still within the north of Chile. Well, and the place itself, it's very complex. It's a region that has been geopolitically divided between 4 different countries. There is a region in Chile, in Argentina, in Peru, and Bolivia. But the Andean culture, it's spread out all throughout that region. So, you know, it's a huge, I mean, it's been for more than a century a problem, right? Where the culture, the regional culture living there has been is split by the countries, and disrupted, of course, and changed all the way of living and all the ways of how the economy worked, everything, right? Language, etc. So there is the Inca Trail as well, passing through that area. Well, that goes all the way south in Chile. And yeah, and it's been, you know, exploited for centuries. Mining industry is very present, and the consequences are devastating. It's been devastating. It's a long story of social movement as well, and it's the desert also of Chile where many people detained and disappeared, and the dictatorship are, right? With all that in mind, at the same time, there are these areas in the region where there is still this pristine, unbelievable ecosystem where, you know, animals are migrating mostly there. So you can actually see areas where the industry is settled and the presence of animals is very minimal. But also there are places where animals coexist with huge mining industries, right? Like Surire, which is actually towards the end of the film. We see some sections of that place, and flamingos cohabit with the extraction of borax in that place. It's supposed to be a protected area, but because of, you know, trades and agreements during the dictatorship, there is still a, you know, a free exploitation deal going on. So yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's a country that is also owned by families. It's, you know, we live still in some way of, you know, colonization, right? Yeah, so I can, you know, this is infinite. I mean, I can speak about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, but that sort of like multiplicity of interpretation or the complexity of the landscape on both, like, you know, a political, geological, and global scale, I think, reads through in the film in some in a really, actually in a really strong way through the sound, which is, I know that's something new for you to use sound in the film, but the soundscape of the film is so visceral in a way, and also like mysterious, foreboding. I wonder if you can talk about how that soundtrack sort of, where it came from. What are we actually listening to also?
Yeah, it's the first film I work with sound. So it was my first experience. And it was very challenging, of course, throughout the process of finding and learning as well. The sound in some way relates to continuing talking about landscape. This region was millions and millions of years ago. What we see now is coming from like huge mega explosions of volcano activity. One of them was the Barcena volcano, and that created what is called the innumerable, which is a kind of like a rock that is forged during the most violent volcanic cataclysms. So this region has that particularity. At the same time, I could not forget the experience of traveling in Bolivia, in the Titicaca, where they call the Titicaca Lake, which is, above 3,000. I mean, I don't know exactly the altitude, but it's like 3,000, 3,500 probably, or about that, which is the altitude in the area where I was filming, which range between 2,000 to 4,500 meters above sea level. So going back to the Titicaca, which is not present on the film and is, even further north, it's called also an eye of the ocean, meaning or relating to the idea or the ancestry that all this place was underwater. And that kept in my background all throughout the making of this film. So with those two things at present, it happened that in one of my trips, I met an oceanographer, Susie Buchan, who has been very active and in research in Chile. She's originally from UK. And she's been doing for more than a decade research on the bioacoustics of blue whales, mostly in the Pacific Ocean. And I met her in the north of Chile. So some of the sound that we hear are her recordings using infrasound and hydrophones, to record infrasound, which is sound that is below our, its frequencies are so low that we cannot really hear them, right? And I wanted to, intuitively, it wasn't that I really planned, but intuitively it happened that I wanted to bring sounds from the earth to the film. And long story short, I was lucky to be in contact with Clive Oppenheimer, a very renowned, amazing person, volcanologist, also from UK, who's been doing a lot of research, like more than a decade as well, of field work in Antarctica. And he basically collaborated with supplying me with some of his recordings. Mm-hmm. So these are recordings that obviously are very difficult to access, and what we hear as well is all this volcanic activity or lakes moving, glaciers as well, the contact of glaciers with the earth. understanding as well that the rocks and the earth is all movable, right? It's like we think of earth as something very solid. We experience it as such, but in reality, it's all like moving pieces, moving parts. So all that vision and acoustic was very inspiring for me. So the sound that we hear, all this underground phenomena, right? Frequencies that are present that still affect us because they are like traveling in the earth, but we cannot hear. And that to me was fascinating, right? To start working with sound, with this sort of invisible sound, which is also resonates so much with the process of making my films and working with analog media, which allows me to have that kind of blindness. But through that blindness, I develop other way of looking at or observing. I'm forced to try to observe differently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find the work really invokes this idea of the classic sublime, right? And that the idea that the sublime comes from man's or humankind's tininess in front of in the scope of nature, right? Like these environments are like seem so vast and so eternal, right? And you're adding this other layer, which are these sounds that are also beyond the Anthropocene. And those two things in combination, they just really give this sense that like this is so much bigger and so much longer and so much wider than the person who's even there filming it, or who could be witnessing these subtle changes in the landscape, right? Like it makes us feel very small. And I'm wondering sort of like how the films relate to like the experience of nature, right? Like, or the experience of being this environment. And I'm not necessarily mean your own personal experience filming it, but like how you would hope that a viewer reflects on this landscape. Like, is it a translation of the landscape? Is it an approximation of the experience? Is it a sort of like sensory experience? I mean, I know it can be all the above, but I'm just wondering sort of how does the viewer place themselves amongst this landscape in this sort of like fragmented landscape?
Well, I mean, the idea or the notion of approximation, it resonates a lot to me. In the sense that, for instance, the sound, thinking on infrasound, the process that the data has to go through it in order for us to perceive makes it already an approximation of what as well will sound like, right? We're not able to really listen the well, but it's more like an approximation of it. And keeping that in mind, I feel something similar happened in the process of experiencing nature and filming or trying to film nature. I'm not looking at or searching for representing the landscape or representing the multiple histories that the landscape holds. I think that speaks by itself, as well. Like imagery or images can become a language by itself. And it's interesting that a year or two, 1 or 2 years later after I made the film, there was an incredible exhibition presented at the Museum of Arte Precolombino in Santiago. And it was called La fiesta de las imágenes, no? The party of images, I will translate, right? And something that really attracted me, well, it was an exhibition about the Indian culture, no? The different cultures that evolve in this region, and more widely, right? Going even northern Peru and southern Chile and Argentina, Bolivia, etc. And there was something very interesting about the way the Indian culture look at the conception of time and space, which is this multi-spatial and multi-sensory realm. They don't look at time and space as one thing, right? Which we tend to relate to. We talk about time or we talk about space as a single. And when we want to multiply them, we have to think in multiplicity, right? Their way of seeing it is already that one, right? It's like space is made of spaces, sort of. The space by itself doesn't exist. And that was something that resonated to me in relation to cinema. I don't know if in relation to this film in particular, or if it's something that it is achieved or not achieved, like expressed through. But there is something that definitely interests me, that makes me feel different, and that I hope that also resonates to people in that manner, and all that the experience can become plural, and it's not just as one in that singularity. And also, other thing that interests me is that they talk about their communication system, which is very based on signs and images and shapes and colors and sounds. And they're used for conveying messages. So they don't see images as the way also Western culture see them. Images are themselves a language, like as images is speaking, right?
Yeah.
And that also, I don't know if I feel like in a way, I hope that that images speak in some way, and by articulating them, they not necessarily get separated from each other, even
Right.
though it's like the structure of analog film. If we go to the basis, is a frame, right after a frame,
right.
consecutive.
Yeah, that's funny. I was actually going to ask you about that next, because I keep thinking about how to structure a film like this, right? Like, what is the like, how do you go to this place, film this, and then think about a sequence of images, right? And I think what you're saying is this like multiplicity of sequences happening in different directions are actually what's, even with the word propelling in my head, seems like a forward momentum, but it's like, to make a film with a sort of like structure like that is really interesting, because it's hard to conceptualize, like a film that works in all these different structural components. But yeah, how do you, I guess I'm trying to find a question in that, but sort of thinking about like the structure of these films, how do you begin to or how do you begin to look at these things you filmed and put them frame by frame, even if you're not thinking about them that way?
Yes, until like the films I've created before Altiplano, they mostly were, they were all made in camera, and there was no outtakes. So everything I filmed became part of the work. And when I started working with Altiplano, I knew that I wanted to make a longer film than before. The ones that I've made, are like Anagrams of Light. Like they range between 2 to 8 minutes or less. And for Altiplano, I wanted to film more, and I wanted to also search for different ways of filming. Still, I kept working with the in-camera editing. And that's something definitely that speaks to me. And it doesn't happen always. It's something that cannot be planned, at least in my case, I cannot really plan it. I cannot really structure it. I have sometimes ideas, sometimes imagery that come to my mind that helps me to guide the process of how to film. And the form of filming will lead into will lead to creating these gestures, right? This language that I was speaking before, right? This kind of dialects. But it's not something that happens always while filming. And it has to do with a momentum. It has to do with the environment where I am, the conditions of that environment, whether if I'm alone or surrounded by people. I mean, all these different elements really affect the process for me of filming. And when it happens, you know it, right? So often, even if 3 months or 4 months pass before I see the film processed, after it's processed, when I see the images, yes, I know, I can spot, those moments that relate to experience that I could, that I could remember and relate to it. And I think this is like a creative process in other forms and other medium as well, right? It's like you just know it when it's happening. It's just the difference with film, an analog film, is that you don't see it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, it will happen in painting, in drawing, it's like this one, you just don't see it.
Yeah, you have a delayed gratification or a delayed relationship to your what you're making. I think, digital photographers may not have that, but
I think the disappointment that as well that happens.
Yeah. That's true.
And then, well, I mean, I struggled for a while, like after, having all my material for Altiplano process that transferred, I struggled for some time thinking how to approach the editing, the structure of it, which was done in a digital. And finally, after like a long round, I went back to keeping the core of those in camera edited moments. So you can feel through the film that there are like sections, and those sections relate to a role, basically. So in a way, up to the 2/3 of the film is mostly all in camera editing, and I will say the last third of the film is when I'm mixing a little bit more the materials. And the structure appears by working with it as well. Also for the sound. The sound came after. The sound came after. And well, when I listened the raw recordings, I could, many of them, I could immediately know where they belong to, right? And where they would really, I listened the sound and I could see the images. So I had to be verified. It was incredible. That experience I will never forget. I received the files from Clive, and as soon as I download them, I just listened to them. And immediately the imagery of the film came, the sections where it has to be, and I had to like pick up whatever I could next to me and start writing as fast as I could everything that was coming up, right? And in 5 minutes, I mostly had the raw structure for the sound. That was incredible, unexpected.
Yeah, it's an incredible, I mean, incredible film, but incredible soundtrack too. I mean, the pairing of the two is just, it's so haunting and amazing.
Mm.
I think that's a good place to end our conversation.
Mm.
We've been talking for about 45 minutes. I wanted to thank you one more time, Malena, A, for this program, but B, for allowing us to screen your films. We're so lucky to be able to have a platform to show, you know, experimental film like this. So again, thank you, and thank you to the viewers for tuning into this conversation.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Brian, and thank you again to the museum. This has been wonderful to share the film with the audience as well. And thank you for everybody who's there. I cannot see you, but I can feel you. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and the films will be, I believe only Altiplano is showing right now on screen. They're still available. They just dumped it in the chat, moca.org/screen. They'll be available for another, I want to say week, maybe 2. So please tune in if you want to re-see them once again. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.